for tuning in to The Leadership Beat, a Bates Communications original podcast series exploring leadership trends and inspiring leaders to innovate and think differently.
Well, hello everyone, I'm Suzanne Bates, and today I have the privilege of sitting down for a conversation with Helen Drinan, who is about to be the immediate past president of Simmons University. Hi Helen, welcome, glad to have you with us today.
Thank you, Suzanne, great to be here.
Under Helen's leadership, let me tell you a little bit about her. Since 2008, Simmons has achieved university status. It has simplified its academic structure by creating 4 colleges, encouraged students to expand their horizons by pursuing interdisciplinary work. Helen's also led the largest fundraising campaign at $100 million for Simmons, and she welcomed the largest 2 freshman classes in history. And before that, Helen had a whole other career as an executive in human resources, in banking, and in healthcare. So Helen, as we're sitting down today, it's June 2020, and not only is your life about to change, but we've seen seismic changes in our world and our nation as we have seen this awakening of activism and a quest for social justice and equity. And of course, we're still in the midst of what we never expected would be this long global pandemic, which is having far-reaching effects on everything, including our college campuses. So I'm really looking forward to talking with you about all that. But first, I thought it would be great for our audience to get to know you and understand how you developed your viewpoints. So let's go all the way back to the beginning, before you were a college president or university president, before you were an executive in business. Where did you grow up, and what did you like to do, and what did you think you would be when you grew up?
Those are great questions to ask, Suzanne. I always am interested in when students answer those questions, because you learn a lot about how someone thought about the world when they were little and how they then navigated the world from that place. So I grew up in the south of Boston. I grew up in a town called Weymouth, Massachusetts, which was at the time, a town. It has grown over the years into really a city. But when I grew up there, life was pretty simple. Life was uncomplicated. And most of my friends were pretty much exactly like me. We did not grow up with lots of material things. Most of us were children of people who were in the Army and maybe got an education because they actually had the GI Bill. And we were all in families that worked very, very hard. And I think that was a great way to grow up. We never felt in any way deprived. We never felt like we were missing things in our lives because we had what we needed, and we had friends, and we did lots of very plain old common activities. I loved to ride my bike, and I would get on that bike at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I would be gone all day long. I would skip lunch. I would drive all over the place, and my mother and father never thought twice. They never wondered whether I was safe. They knew I was safe. And then when I came back in the late afternoon, I was exhausted. I ate my dinner, played out in the street, and started all over again the next day. It was a simple and fun life. It really was.
You know, the freedoms that, our generation enjoyed as children are just so different from today for many reasons. But that's part of what shapes you, and you were clearly an explorer and probably developed a lot of that courage that, came along later. What did your parents do? Tell me about your family and, a little more about all that.
Yeah, my dad was a school teacher. He was an English and history teacher. And that was pivotal in my life because he was a master of the English language. Mm-hmm. You would not sit at dinner without being corrected if you made a mistake in your agreement between the plural and the verb, and everything had to be corrected. My father was a tyrant about accuracy in speaking the language. And over the course of my life, I actually began to appreciate that because as I got older and realized the importance of writing a correct sentence and speaking a correct sentence, all those years of having been told that's incorrect, paid off, even though it didn't feel good necessarily at the time. So my dad was a school teacher. My mother was a very hardworking non-college graduate who started out in an accounting office and worked her way up over the years to ultimately become a human resources professional, funnily enough. And so there was definitely a connection there in terms of my watching my mother, work all those years and then taking a career, at least in the same field, though not quite different. But they both worked multiple jobs, and they really, I remember that hard work was a theme in our house. There was never a moment when they weren't industriously out in the yard, working on the plants if they weren't working at a job. They were hardworking people, and they set an incredibly proud standard for the value of hard work. They never, ever, ever avoided something that was just, it got to get done,
Yeah, that's a great foundation.
A great foundation. It really is. It's sort of the word industriousness, really comes to my mind. I had one sister, one sibling. There were only the two of us. And she's younger than I. And we were very different kids, very different kids. I was a worrywart. I was a constant student, always worried about doing well in school. My sister was more freewheeling and more interested in sort of other things in life. And so we were quite different, but we grew up in the same household under the same kinds of influences, ended up doing quite different things with our lives, but are still quite friendly today, obviously.
Yeah. So I assume you graduated with pretty good grades from Weymouth High School, and then you went to Mount Holyoke College. What did you major in, and what were your plans then?
So I was a good student in high school. However, I also realized that being a good student in high school wasn't necessarily the same thing as being a good student in a highly competitive college. And I had my comeuppance when I showed up at Mount Holyoke College. And it was one of those things, I so cherished my college experience. I feel like every single day there was an unbelievable gift. But part of that gift was realizing how much there is to learn in the world. When you leave high school with, you've earned high grades, and you think that, it's such a big accomplishment to have 3-year high honors and this kind of thing. And then you go to school with a mixture of people from all over the world whose life experience is maybe significantly broader than yours. It can be a humbling experience. And it was great to have that experience. And I really learned over the course of my time there, the most significant thing I learned was to become a lifelong learner. That how you learn to learn is really what college is all about. The courses that you take means to an end, but really learning how to learn and learning that learning is really what keeps you engaged in the world and what keeps you moving forward in whatever you're trying to do. So I am so grateful for that experience, and I really worry a lot about the way we now think about a liberal arts education as somehow unnecessary or some kind of a privilege that should not be available because it doesn't lead immediately to a job. What a tragedy that is, because most of the jobs I've gotten because I learned how to learn, not because somebody trained me to do a specific job. And so I really, really advocate for anyone who will think about it to really invest in a liberal arts education as their undergraduate experience. I think it's so important.
Well, I'm, of course, a big fan of liberal arts education. I got one myself, and I know, of course, there's a place for vocational education.
Of course.
And
Yeah.
at the pace that our world is changing, we have to be lifelong learners. So
Right.
that's really interesting. Well, my next question is about your family, and it looks like maybe your husband walked in the door, so that would be a perfect time for me to ask this question. But I think that the two of you were in the Peace Corps, weren't you, in the 70s?
We actually married at the end of our junior year in college. And we had desperately wanted to go in the Peace Corps. But once we were married, we then adopted our youngest child, our oldest child, excuse me. And so we thought, okay, that does the Peace Corps, because they take couples, but they don't take families. So what do you know, but we actually graduate, and David, my husband's college roommate, had gone into the Peace Corps in Afghanistan. And he wrote us a letter one day and said, I hear Peace Corps is accepting families. And we said, really? And so the next thing you know, we applied, and we ended up going to the Philippines for almost 3 years with our 2 children, because after we had adopted our son, we had our second child. And that was, without question, Suzanne, a life-changing experience. To live,
How so?
well, you know, to be 22 years old, 23 years old, grow up in the United States in the kind of environment that I've just described, and go all the way around the world to a country where it's perpetual summer. The environment is totally different. It's like forest land. There's no winter snow, New England. It's an entirely different physical place. And then culturally, it is a poor nation. And you know that it's a poor nation because poverty is everywhere. And so you have to learn to live in at an entirely different standard, because that's the standard of life there. And that is at an early age for a young American person, I think, to realize both the privilege with which we are raised, even in the simplest terms in this country, and the opportunities that are here. I remember the first time that we visited the American Embassy in Manila, and you walk into this, it's a very large facade, and Americans are allowed to eat in the cafeteria. And when you have not had American food for a long time, the idea of a hot dog or a peanut butter sandwich, you can't think of anything better. So we would, whenever we were in Manila, we would go. The first time I walked into the gate, there's a big set of signs over the front door, and they have the immigration preferences. So there are immigration preferences 1 through 6. First preference is you have something like a medical degree or a nursing degree. You're going to get the opportunity to apply for citizenship, for an opportunity to come to the United States in a minute. 6th preference is you don't have any family or friends. You just want to immigrate. They tell you the time underneath the preference. So maybe first preference is 30 days. 6th preference may be 10 years. Such a sobering statement that people in this country are willing to wait 10 years in line every time they show up at the embassy for the opportunity to come to the United States. That in and of itself is an unbelievable lesson for a 22-year-old American person. So that kind of experience is very, very changing in your life.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're reflecting on that with all the
absolutely
conversation going on today, and the, you know, how discouraged people feel about our society.
I never, ever forget that, Suzanne, when, especially when I've looked at all the terrible things that have been going on the southern border. I know that for generations, people have strived to come to the United States, and we are a country of immigrants. How would we be without the immigration that we've had? So it's, I mean, it was a point in time that's just brilliantly bulleted in my brain.
Yeah. I think perhaps it also would give you an appreciation for how America is admired, and how we sometimes take for granted so many of the freedoms we have in spite of the many challenges that we have.
And the opportunity. You know, I think opportunity is harder today than it was when we were younger. I do think that to be true. But I also think that we have much more opportunity here than we acknowledge. And you know, if you combine that opportunity with the hard work that most immigrants bring as their standard, I can see why people would see this as the land of opportunity. They do. Yeah.
Well, speaking of young people, it's great to hear your story as a young person, young adult, young mother, and all of that. There's just so much to talk about right now at this moment in time for college campuses. I think, beyond even the immediate questions of how will campuses reopen, what is it going to cost in time, money, and resources to keep them safe? How will students feel about coming back? How will their parents feel? How will faculty feel? There's also, I think, this bigger question that's arisen over the business model for colleges and universities.
Absolutely.
And you are known for bringing financial stability to Simmons. That was one of your core, I think, missions when you set out. So I know you've got a view on this. What's your view of what needs to happen now?
Yeah, so, I am not a traditional college president. I don't have an academic background that includes a PhD, and that is such really a mark of academia. I do have a strong business background, and it happened that when I went to Simmons, that was of far greater need than the PhD was. Today, I would say that has reversed, and I'm thrilled that the new president we have is a very strong academic as well as a strong financial mind. But I would say that the higher education business model is definitely broken. We have known this for some time, and now we have an emergency situation that is raising the validity of that concern to a very high view. And there's no denying it anymore. And I was recently interviewed for an article in which I said that I do believe we will see at least a 40-year acceleration in the speed of change in higher education because of this crisis. And that is a good thing. And there will be pain, but good that we get on with it, because the cost of the education in this country is too high. It's simply too high. And it's the reason for everything else. It's the reason for the high level of indebtedness. It's the reason for the lack of access. It's the reason for many people having to drop out, restart, drop out, restart, not actually get the value of their degree in a timely fashion. And we own that problem. And the question is, do we have the courage to fix the problem? Because it really means addressing basics. And the basics are what people live for, the things that are important to them. So, for example, I think it is challenging, without question, to think about how you unravel each of these pieces. But there are basic elements of delivering education that I think have to be examined. So right now, the model is based on a tenure system. And if you think about a tenure system, we have analogs in other parts of our economy like that. And there are flaws in that system. It was originally created to protect academic freedom. And I do believe when it was originally created, that was a major mechanism. Today, rarely is anyone ever in a situation of trouble because someone is challenging their academic freedom. And so the system has moved to be an economically protective system. And that is not a healthy system in any industry. So that's at the core of the teaching. And it causes a great deal of economic excess. American higher education is one of the few industries in the country that has never really participated in productivity evaluations, process improvements, any kind of evaluation of how to do things more efficiently and better. We have examples within the industry of people who've broken out and said, we're going to do this differently. But they're not the model, they're the exception.
So those are really tough problems to solve for, and I'm sure we could spend much more time on that, but I'm assuming that these are not either or solutions, they're and solutions.
They
right?
are.
Where we're going to have to just rethink and put together a whole new model. It's not one thing, it's really everything, right?
That's right. But Suzanne, one of the things that's very interesting is that the advancing technologies are going to force some of these conversations to happen where otherwise they might not have. So for example, right now, we have, at Simmons, and this was truly out of necessity, that we really invested in exploring online graduate professional education. And the necessity was that we could not grow. You know, we have some very great programs, but we could not grow them beyond the greater Boston area because for very practical reasons. So for example, our nursing program, you need to do a lot of clinical placements in a nursing program. Boston is a highly competitive medical environment. If you have 150 students and you decide you'd like to have 300 students, you can't, because you can't necessarily get 150 more clinical placements. So if you want to grow, you have to figure out a way to grow beyond your geography. And that really, really put Simmons in a place to say, then we better understand this technology. Even if in the early days, it was looked at as really second rate, not the right way to do this. The traditional way was the way to do this. But we were in a situation where we had to explore. We just had to be willing to try. And what we found, of course, was that there was a great way to do this if you had the proper partnership and the proper capabilities and technological support. And so we were able to really learn in the early days. We were early adopters, which is a very, very big advantage in graduate professional education, and it turned Simmons around. It absolutely doubled our revenue base. You cannot imagine the difference that that makes in a tuition-dependent, modestly endowed institution. So now we're at the front end of undergraduate education, and it is yet another wonderful opportunity for us. But, you know, would we have taken the chance if necessity were not pushing us? And I think right now, necessity is pushing the whole industry to say, what is this technology offering for us? And one of the wonderful things that the technology offers for us is a baseline opportunity for everyone. A baseline opportunity for everyone.
Right, it opens up access, right?
Absolutely.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And you can always build on baseline. You know, I mean, I have two daughters who went to college. One of them went to community college and then went to four-year college. The other one went to four-year college, master's degree, and law school. Each child is different. And if you can figure out how you get into the system in a way that works for you, that's what you want. And we need that universal access. And technology is going to make that possible.
You've had a lot of years in the leadership seat.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think it's probably obvious to people how you brought your background in human resources and people leadership and then board leadership into your role as a college president. And through all these, and I may say decades, I've been at it for decades too, right? Decades, you've, I'm sure, developed a pretty strong view of what leadership is. How do you think about it? How do you define it?
So I would say I think about this a lot because I think that there's such interesting theories about leadership. And, you know, Warren Bennis is kind of the father of leadership. He's viewed as the father. He died several years ago. He was one of the early people who really tried to talk about the elements of leadership and how you can shift from style to style and what components of leadership there are. And so I feel like over the years, I've tried and tested different approaches, like this style of leadership or advocate for that style of leadership. And at the end of the day, I think it really comes down to the simplest of models, which is that the leader is in service to the organization. And if you always keep that in mind, that why you're there is for the ultimate sustainability of the organization, then I think it's easy to keep the systems and the stressors and the problems in context, because you're always sorting for, okay, keep at the top of the list what is driving this organization to its ultimate good. The other thing I think that I have learned over the years is that whatever it was that brought this organization into being has to be really well understood, because if in fact you remain true to that, it is what powers the continuity of the organization. So in fact, in my experience at Simmons, really going back and being totally in tune with the direction of the founder of Simmons, John Simmons, it has been invaluable in making choices about the future strategy of the organization, because it's so related to why the organization has been successful.
That is such a fascinating insight. I think
Yeah.
so often leaders, when they take over in a role, even if they've come up through the organization, although it's easier if you have, because you have a little better grasp of what it's all about, as you did when you were leading the board, it's still the honoring of, it's not just the past, it's the honoring of the mission, it's the honoring of the original purpose.
Right.
That makes that institution or that company unique, and every entity, every company, every university, every organization has that at its core. So if we don't honor that, then we lose our sense of purpose, and it's hard for people who work there to connect with that purpose.
That's right. When I was a student at Mount Holyoke, I was so struck by the fact that the founder's grave is at the center of the campus. So you walk across that campus every day, you are aware of the existence of Mary Lyon, and the woman who took a small purse and went door to door and said, I am going to create an institution for the education of women. When I went to Simmons, nobody knew about John Simmons. Nobody talked about him. He has such a fascinating story. He became the wealthiest clothing manufacturer in the United States during the Civil War, and he turned around and put his entire estate at the service of the women who had made him so successful. And his purpose was to enable them to acquire independent livelihoods. That was his purpose. That women in the 1800s who couldn't write a check for themselves, couldn't own property, would be able to acquire an independent livelihood. That thought iterates throughout history. Today, an independent livelihood means empowered financially. It means making choices about your entire life. But that is such a strong message, to be independently able to earn a living. That it's just a great way to think about why you sustain this organization.
It isn't lost on me that you were president when the Me Too movement finally began, coming out of the entertainment industry, but then of course in the news industry, which is where I worked before I was the CEO of my company. And you know, I know you're obviously a great proponent of women in leadership. What do you think is going to happen next? I mean, there's been some progress with getting women, more women into the C-suite and in public companies. There are some more women on boards now because of changes in legislation. California led the way, but there have been others too. Right. It still feels, I think, for a lot of women, and also people of diverse backgrounds, generally a little slow. So
very slow.
What do you think is the next wave or impetus that's going to change things?
The word that we hear a lot now is allyship in the context of inclusion. I do believe, Suzanne, that the time is now. We have to have male-female partnerships driving these. This has been a women's journey for a very long time. And I would say lots of men standing on the sidelines, helpful, encouraging, but not actually making things happen. And I think that's the only way this is going to take a next step. I think it's the only way it's going to take a next step. What we're seeing now in terms of just the society stepping back and saying, wow, how long we have tolerated such bad behavior around racism, maybe is enough of a catalyst to get conversation broader. But I think that there is no solution if there is not a collaborative effort between men and women, between people of color and people not of color. If we can't get that going, I think that's the big barrier. That's the big barrier.
Well, we're winding down a conversation that could go on, and I just would like to observe that you're so engaging and stimulating to talk with, because you have developed so much practical wisdom over the years. And I'm just curious about, as you look back and think about yourself as a young executive starting out in your first big job, what advice would you have to you back then that you wish you had known and know now?
Don't worry about the consequences of every decision you're going to make. Do your best in the moment, keep your head about you, and it will all be fine. I think when you're new to a big job, you're constantly worried about, I'm going to stumble, I'm going to fail, I'm going to make the wrong decision. Rarely is anything you're going to do going to have such significant consequences. You just need to power on and do the best you can, and pay attention to your instincts, because there's a reason you got this job. People trust you and they think that you are going to do fine, and you need to believe you're going to do fine. Let it go, you know? I think just having the courage to say, I'm going to do my best and that's going to be good enough, is so important in that time. And don't spend your energy on anxiety and worry. It's going to be fine.
Well, that's a very reassuring message in a very tumultuous time.
Yep.
And I know everyone listening at any age appreciates that. So Helen Drinan, thank you so much for your wonderful insights. It's been great talking with you, and I know how much our audience has appreciated hearing your wisdom. Thank you.
Okay. Have a great afternoon, Suzanne.
Thank you.
Yeah.